Good to see lots of people joining. Hopefully more to follow.
Oh, very cool. I think Frank has added an AI note taker.
Oh, that's
I think that's
fancy.
the first time we've had an AI note taker in one of these sessions. Thank you, Frank. It's good to have that in here.
Interesting.
Just gonna set my timer.
We'll give it a few more minutes before we properly kick off the webinar. We want to give people opportunity to dial in. I think the way of the world now is people are constantly jumping from one Zoom or Teams call straight into another. So yes, Ravinda, that's right. We are recording the webinar. What we'll do is we'll make sure it's sent out to everybody after the session, everyone that's subscribed to join. So all of you here today, we will make sure that's sent out to you. If you are a member of the EX space as well, it will also be uploaded to our webinar archive as well. So lots of other ways to watch this back. So not to worry there. And we'll also share any slides too, won't we, Lee?
Absolutely. Yeah. Catch up TV is here and live. As is customary with these sessions, if you joined us before, it'd be really great to hear where you're dialing in from today. So just pop that in the chat, please. Always good to see the corners of the world that we've got into. Hertfordshire, brilliant, not too far away. Have we got any international joiners today?
Definitely some familiar faces here. Lovely to see you, Laura. I haven't seen you for a long time. Good to see you. Welcome back to the webinars.
Yes, thank you, Katie. Yeah, this popped into the inbox and it was fortuitous. Another meeting had cancelled, and I thought, why not grab a nice cold drink and enjoy yet another session with you.
Oh, I love it. It's always nice when those things happen, isn't it?
We're all
Excellent.
UK at the moment. Watford's very wet and rainy. Scotland, Surrey. Not too exotic for this one then, Katie. Amsterdam, oh, we're getting there. We're going
Right,
international
you're the
now.
winner so far, Michelle. You're the furthest afield so far.
Any others?
Excellent.
Do we get going, Katie? How are we doing?
Yeah, let's get kicked off properly.
Good stuff. Right. Let me share the slides. How's that, Katie? Are we full screen?
Looks good to me.
Fantastic. Good stuff. So, welcome to the second of these summer series sessions that we're running. The first one was on generative AI and how that's changing the world of work. And this one really plays on from that, in that, we're about to enter, arguably, we're now in a period of incredible change within the workplace as organizations begin to grapple, not least with AI. So we wanted to shine the spotlight on change management, and how to make sure it's much more people-centric. A hunch that actually at the moment it tends not to be. What would be amazing, just at the start here, as we get into the subject, is just to get your views. What do you think human-centered change is all about, and how different is that to, if we like, traditional change? If you accept there's a kind of traditional approach to change management, we'll go into that. We'll explore that as we go through the session. But it'd be really good in the chat to get your thoughts initially on human-centered change and what that means. Katie, I can't see the chat, so I'm going to rely on you to monitor that and let me know if there's anything key to pick up on.
I can definitely do that. We've got a couple of answers coming through already, which is nice. Ravinda saying, putting people at the forefront, traditional change management equals a project management approach change from Judy. Another one from Ravinda, it's not just process driven. Nikki, working with everyone to implement change rather than dictating changes, getting feedback and ideas. So few nice thoughts going in there. Do feel free to keep adding to that whilst Lee does the intro.
Good stuff. Yeah, it sounds like we're on the same page already, which is brilliant. For those of you that aren't EXSpace members yet, why not? It's completely free now to join. Literally takes seconds to sign up. No credit card at all required. No strings, no tie-ins at all. And once you're in as an EX Essentials member, which is our entry-level membership, you'll get access to a whole bunch of resources. We're going to touch on some of the tools of EX as we go through this particular webinar, but there's an absolute wealth of stuff in there on both the free plan and of course on the paid plans as well. But please join us. It's a small but growing and very vibrant community. We're about 250 strong as we stand, but growing every week. So please, if you're not already part of the club, get on board. Right, in terms of what's coming up over the next 50 odd minutes, I've split this into two really. So the first part of the webinar is going to look at really the notion that we need to change how we do change. So why change? We're going to look at change, the history of change management really, and what that's come from, and how that's shaped the way that big organizations in particular approach and tackle change. And the flip side of that, we're going to look at where change typically goes wrong. And it's often these human people-centric parts of change management is where it typically goes off the rails. No surprise. So we'll explore that. We'll kind of make the case for change, for changing change in the first half. We'll pause for questions and reflections and observations just after that. So please use the chat facility to make any comments and ask questions right the way from the get-go here. We'll cover those midway. And then we'll get into part two, which is really looking at what we mean by human-centered change. Touched on that already. Getting under the skin of some of the more innovative thinkers around change management, some of the novel approaches that have emerged in recent years, and some of them actually dating back quite a long way, but really not yet utilised effectively in the workplace. And of course, we'll look at getting practical. How do we actually start to make use of that and kickstart human-centered change within our own organisations? And then at the end, we'll have a chance for more questions and reflections. So without further ado, let's get our teeth into that first question: why change? And I think I'm being a little bit provocative with some of the imagery in this session, but for me, change management is broken. We can have that argument along the way, but really I think, and here I'm talking specifically about the way that we do big change in large organizations typically. So that big programmatic project-based approach to change that we all know and love. Any of us that have spent any time in large businesses will have come across many of these over the years. But my hunch is, and I think there's a body, a school of thought that's really building up around this now, that we've lost sight of human beings in this process. And what we do is we tend to focus on the mechanics, on the products of change, on the processes, on systems, and on stuff. And all of the areas where we approach change, we hatch plans in darkened rooms rather than involving people. We're highly secretive rather than open and transparent. Again, think of the change programs you've been involved in. And I think for me, it's broken in two fundamental ways. First, for the organisation, and secondly, from an employee perspective. So you put your human shoes on. It's absolutely broken from that perspective, from the view of those that are impacted and affected by change. But also, it's failing to punch its weight for organisations as well. And let's have a look at some of those statistics here. I'll pop them all up there so you can have a read as I'm talking. There's widely cited figures like typically between 70 and 80% of change programs fail to deliver the benefits they set out to achieve. Actually, when you dig a bit deeper, there's fairly limited scientific evidence to support that. It's sketchy at best. But what we do know, and I know this from my own experience, helping large organisations with change, you'll know this, and it's borne out in study after study. What you see on the screen here are just a tip of the iceberg in terms of studies that underline how ineffective traditional approaches to change are. It's just not punching its weight. It's blindingly obvious, really, that change is failing to deliver real change. So just to pull out a few of those there, 73% of organisations now reporting being near the point of change saturation. So we know there's this thing of change fatigue. We'll explore that a little bit as we get into the session. But almost the point of change saturation, where literally employees and organisations cannot take any more of this. 18%, 1 in 5 employees saying they'd consider leaving their job if a big organisational change occurred. Employees' willingness, up there on the top left, Gartner, employee willingness to support enterprise change collapsed in 2022 to 43%, down from 74% in 2016. So there is this sense that actually in recent years, and if we step back away from change for a moment, we've really seen the world of work change since the pandemic, or the change has been accelerated by the pandemic, with work from home and a whole range of other factors now coming in. But one of those observations is that support for change is waning. As I say, change saturation is here, and probably at the most dangerous point, really, as from one recent study by Gallup, 85% of senior executives right now predict an explosive increase in organizational change projects in the next 5 years. And this is really driven heavily by AI. We touched on it in the last session, how Microsoft and others are now weaving it into the sort of systems that we know and we use day to day as part of our work inside organizations. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Once organizations themselves begin to really grapple with the impact of AI and what it can achieve for them, we're going to see a whole host of change and transformational projects, digital transformation-based projects that stem from that. So really dangerous, this point at which employees are becoming perhaps more resistant than ever to change. We're going into a period where there's going to be truly monumental change. So something for me has got to change there. So that's the organisational perspective. And the other is the human angle on this. Again, you put yourself in the shoes of employees. They're being really drowned, and we'll look at some of the data on this in a moment. But really, the experience, if you think of employee experience and you think of change and transformation inside an organization, that's the point at which emotions are probably most heightened within the organization. It's obviously a pain point, and it's when people are perhaps at their most emotional, most exposed, most fearful. And at the moment, the journey of change, the experience of change that employees have is pretty damn poor. We've really programmed employees over the decades to equate organizational change with fear, loathing, pain, anger, desperation, all sorts of negative emotions, and that can't in and of itself be a good thing. So let's have a look at just one study. Again, there's dozens of studies out there that underline this point. And this is from the American Psychological Association fairly recently. And it's looking at workers, employees who reported being impacted by organizational change, either currently or in the past 12 months. They're 2 times more likely to report chronic stress. They're 4 times more likely to report experiencing negative physical health symptoms at work. They're 3 times more likely to say that they don't trust their employer, a whole other theme there of trust, and we know how hugely important that is. And they're 3 times more likely to feel cynical and negative towards their colleagues during the workday. So these are really profound negative impacts that historic current approaches to change are having on employees, a really, really poor experience. So I think as EX professionals and champions for a kind of more human-centered approach to work, all of this is saying we need to really shift how we do this and how we approach change, so that employees don't feel lost at sea, don't feel like they're sinking, don't feel scared and desperate. There is a more positive way of approaching change. Okay, let's have how did we get here though? Okay, so change has been around since the dawn of industrialization, I guess, and change management thinking has been around for many, many decades. So let's have a really quick look at some of the leading thinkers really who have shaped how we do change, including some of the more modern thinkers as well. Not a particularly diverse group here, but that's another subject. But let me just walk you through some of these sort of clockwise from top left. The guy there in the glasses, in the specs, is Kurt Lewin. I guess many of you will have heard of him. Hugely influential. He was writing back in the 1950s, and he really kicked off the field of change management with a 3-step model, and a really simplistic linear model that talked about unfreezing the organization, moving things around, making the necessary changes, and then refreezing the organization. Now we kind of laugh at that now. It's so simplistic, and it's been heavily criticized since. But still, these are the roots in which today's thinking around change management were born. They emerged from that scientific management, that kind of mechanistic way of thinking about organizations. And that really has stayed with us. And some of Kurt Lewin's other work around force field analysis, for instance, remains really quite influential in the workplace as well. So yeah, if you haven't come across him, Kurt Lewin, the kind of godfather of change. Then moving on, the next guy here is Stanley Milgram. Now, Stanley Milgram wasn't really writing about change. He was a professor at Yale University, and he did a very famous experiment called the Small World Experiment, which was really about social networking. And the outcome of that was a theory called 6 degrees of separation, which you'll know, not to be mixed up, I hasten to add, with 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, which is a very different thing. Worth Googling that when you get a moment, but not now. And what he discovered was actually the degrees of separation between any one individual and another in the world are much smaller than we think. And he did this through an experiment that moved a package across America to from across people in the state of Omaha to a stockbroker based in Boston. And from that, he deduced that there's 6 degrees of separation. And actually, we know now in this age of social networking, of Twitter or X and Facebook and TikTok, that actually he wasn't far wrong, even writing then. I think now studies have said it's slightly higher than 6, but around 7 point something are the degrees of separation that separate us as human beings. And we'll come back to that later, not specifically on change, but a really important part of the backdrop to what we're going to talk about. Next one along, hugely influential, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You'll all have heard, I guess, of the change curve. And I'd say this is probably the single most influential tool in change management in the workplace, certainly one of the most prolifically used ones. Now, Kubler-Ross was writing on a completely different subject. Her book was called On Death and Dying. It was published in 1969, and it was about the loss of a loved one. It wasn't about change within organizations at all. And the change curve was a way of describing the journey the psychological journey that you go through when you lose someone you love. And you'll know that curve, that famous curve, and the stages that you go through. And it's very heavily used still as the way of planning change programs and the reactions to change. And it's useful. It takes us from the sort of mechanistic approaches of yesteryear to actually beginning to think about humans. That's a good thing, right? But it's sort of, its assumption is that change equates to shock and major loss and that it's an inherently negative thing. And that actually, I think, has shaped the way that we do change in the modern world as well. So Kubler-Ross back in '69. Next up, another bespectacled character on the bottom row there, William Bridges. He took Kubler-Ross's work, he used that, and he was writing in the 90s, the mid-90s, the early 2000s, about transitions. And he was the first person really to differentiate between change on one hand and transition on the other. And actually for him, change is systematic. It's about moving things or plugging in a new system, whereas transition is the psychological journey that we go through to learn to deal with that transition, that new tool, whatever it is. So he was the first one really to kind of explore that psychological aspect of change within an organizational setting. We'll touch on his work again later. Next up, John Kotter. He's I guess the sort of C-suite's change guru of choice, even today. Harvard Business School professor, again writing in the 90s and early 2000s, hugely influential. A lot of his teaching now is baked into the MBA programs that are churning out the leaders of tomorrow. And he purported an eight-step change model, which again usefully touched on some of the situational stuff, but also touched on some of the human aspects of change, like communication and behaviours. So through this journey, we're starting to see the emergence of a more human-centric approach in the way that theorists think about change. And the final guy here I'm going to flag up is Dr. Leandro Herrero. If you haven't read his book, Viral Change, I highly recommend it. He builds on some of this earlier work, particularly the stuff that Stanley Milgram was exploring around social network theory. And he came up with this idea of viral, or what I call infectious change, where we, rather than sort of this top-down approach to change that's led from the top and cascades through the organization, touching and washing over everyone, what we should do actually is find the influencers in the organization, get them to live and breathe really specific, tangible behaviors. And if you get that right, the change will spread like a virus, like a pandemic through the organization. Again, we'll come back to that because I think that's a really important part of the overall human-centered change thinking. So that's about 6-7 decades of change management thinking in what, 5 or 6 minutes there. And let's touch. We know where change goes wrong, right? And I'm gonna put these up there, but these are what I call the 12 derailers of change. Just pluck a few of those out. You know, we've talked elsewhere, and we know increasingly the importance of listening, genuine listening, to culture, to engagement, to employee experience. And change is a real, is where listening fails very often, is that we bake it in a darkened room, we announce it. We might have some Q&As on the intranet, is that really listening? We might have some forums where we ask people to raise a few questions, but we're not really listening in a systematic way, in a genuine way. We're not tuning into people's emotions as well as their questions and thoughts, not involving employees. A lot of the historic way that we approach change is that it's done to people rather than done with them. And that's a really fundamental difference with when we approach this from a human-centered perspective. What we want is to use the tools of EX to involve employees in shaping and coming up with the solutions. Because at the end of the day, the ones most effective are often the frontline folk. And the frontline folk actually often know what's broken, what a good solution would be. Yet we fail to involve them very often. Not providing enough context for change there at the bottom, not getting middle managers on board, not role modeling the right behaviors. And my favorite is sort of flavor of the month syndrome. So again, one of the ways that I categorize typical big change in organizations is that it's heavily programmed and campaigned, and we have lovely big brands and we give it a name and a flag and we announce it from the rooftops. And actually employees have seen that time and time and time again. And given the track record of change, often those things have failed, and employees have a very long memory. So is it any surprise that they're then skeptical about the next big change program that's coming down the line? So I'll just introduce you here to the change program management office leader. And I'm being again a bit provocative here, but these folk have almost become like a sort of Pennywise figure. When they rock up in the organization, we know things are going to get messy. And this sense of, well, change is on the way, fear, desperation, anger, and so on. And that's what we've created, really. And I think, the change resistance is a real thing. But I love this quote here from Ronald Hertz Heifetz, I'm going to say, pronouncing that completely wrong, that what people resist is not change per se, it's loss. And it's this thing that through the way we've done change, we've focused employee minds on loss, and naturally, loss aversion is a real thing. We are more fearful of losing things than we are excited to gain new things. That's a very real thing, but we've programmed employees to think in that way. And for me, there's a better way. There's got to be a better way. If you agree that that's the way that change is often done, what's the alternative? And we're going to start to explore that now. But for me, at the very heart of it is empathy, really understanding and getting into the shoes of employees, genuinely involving employees, co-creation, all of the things that we champion from an employee experience perspective. So I want to pause very briefly there. It'd be great to get any questions or reflections. If any of you are already doing change in a really human-centric way, love to hear that. We'll come back at the end for some examples. Often I find that organizations are doing elements of this incredibly well, but what's missing is a kind of holistic approach to change that kind of joins the dots of all these things, which is what we'll try and talk about in a moment. Katie, what's coming up?
No questions at the moment, but still lots of good things to read in the chat if you haven't already ventured on there. Just reflections on what people's take on human-centered change is. Just got a new one that's just come through. Georgina, we've been running change surveys to help support leaders, get them to act on feelings, fears, and feedback. So starting to bring in that empathy piece, Lee. It's a good time just to remind everybody that throughout this webinar today, feel free to pop questions in the chat. We will have opportunity to filter out some more questions as we get closer to the end. Another comment's just come through. Ravinda, we have run manager workshops. So working with people at the forefront of change, managers who obviously play a really critical role in what happens.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely central to this. And there's a slide I took out of this deck actually, which is a stat I'll try to get out later, that shows that many leaders and managers feel completely unprepared to deal with change, to play a critical role in change with their people, to lead change with their teams. And again, it's an old bugbear of ours that line managers are just a forgotten audience. They're easy to write off. They're overworked, but boy, are they critical. They're as I always say, the guardians of everyday EX, and that's no different when it comes to change. They should be the guardians of everyday CX, if you want to say, change experience for their teams as well. Thank you, Katie. Let's march on then. So, William Bridges.
Sorry, just a real quickie. There's a really nice thing that's just come through from Judy, which is I didn't want to skip over, saying that people misunderstand resistance. They see it as people being difficult rather than seeing that they care. And I just wanted to say that now.
Yeah. This is a really important theme, is actually getting to know the people that are affected. I come from an internal comms background, and we talk about audience, and audience is a really passive thing, right? It's a bunch of spectators watching something. That's not the way to think about this. These are real people with real emotions, real fears, who want to grow, and often the most activist members of our community, the most activists, the most vocal, arguably negative employees are the ones who care the most. They're the ones who've been around for decades, who love the organisation, who don't want to see yet another change initiative fail. But we fail to tune into that. I think you're absolutely right. So let's delve into this a little bit deeper. So William Bridges, again, I'm going to flag him up. If you haven't read any of his stuff, it's good. It's a few years old now, back in the 90s. But I love this quote. It's when we are in transition that we're most alive. And he's really latched onto something key here. It's this journey, this psychological journey from what was to what's going to be, from the past to the future, is really an opportunity for renewal, for growth, for excitement, for feeling alive. And we need to tap into that as organizations, because that's the thing that will get our employees fired up. So he will touch on this really briefly. It's almost a webinar in its own right, and sorry for the quality of this graphic. It's absolutely horrendous. This is his book, Transitions: Making Sense of Life's Changes. And his model here is what you really don't get from that visual, but it's a river. The neutral zone in the middle is a river, and he characterizes change as a sort of crossing the river from one side to the other. And this is where there are parallels with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross writing on grief and the loss of a loved one. He says the starting point for change is an ending, is to let go of the past, is the loss of something. Again, what I don't like is it starts with that sort of loss mindset rather than a growth mindset. But there's something really inherently important here. In every change and transformation, people lose something. It may be status or perceived status. It may be, if they're shifting to hot desking, they're losing somewhere on their desk to have pictures of their friends and family and loved ones. As simple as that. It could be, to use an example from my past, we moved to a lovely new office building, professional services business, and we got rid of all the kettles, and we put in these lovely bean to cup coffee grinding machines, state of the art. And there was absolute uproar amongst the young associate graduate intake population, because they had nowhere to make their pot noodles up. So we had to bring the kettles back. A really silly example, but a good example of where the losses are sometimes tiny little things that can make an enormous difference and can really derail change. So, he's right, and Kubler-Ross is right. We do need to think about what it is that people could be losing as part of this. And you cross this river, and the neutral zone is the worst description of it, because it's a time of chaos, of head scratching, of uncertainty, as you transition from the past to where you're heading. And eventually you'll get through this. And it's, every change program has a period of kind of settling down before you emerge the other side, and things start to happen. But again, a really good model. And within his book, he also talks about the 4 Ps of transition management. Now, remember, what we're talking about here is not the change. For him, the change is getting the new computer system plugged in and working, if it's a tech rollout, or getting people over sitting down in their new office, if it's an office move. What this is, the transition, is a psychological journey that people need to go through to come to terms with that and make the most of that. And the 4 Ps are purpose. So Simon Sinek, widely cited, begin with why, or start with why. We need to answer the why. What's the purpose? What's the rationale for change? And importantly, why now? We often do the why, but we don't do the why now. What's the burning platform here? Why do we need to change? What's the commercial imperative here? What happens if we don't change? And again, change typically in the way it's communicated, it's hatched in a darkened room, all the decisions are made, silence, secrecy, and then it's unleashed on the organization. And actually that's too late. So we communicate in terms of announcing the change and the decisions. What we rarely do well is communicating the context and rationale and backdrop for change, which is hugely important. Painting a picture of the future, again, massively important. And sometimes in the best communication programs I've seen, it can be quite literally painting a picture, creating a visual that everyone can get their heads around. So words are part of this. It can be a vision statement, of course, but actually visuals can be hugely powerful. And even better if you can create those visuals with input from employees and design that, co-create that painting, that picture of the future. Plan is the kind of transition plan. So again, if you look at the mechanics of a typical change program, there's always a change plan, but when you scrutinize that change plan, it's about systems. It's about plugging things in, undoing other things. It's rarely about the psychology of change. So arguably you need a change plan, but you also need a transition plan alongside it. You need someone, somewhere needs to be planning for the psychological journey that people are going to go on here and thinking about that. And very often that's not present in a project team or program team, which tend to come from a sort of tech and project thinking background. So for us on this call, we need to really fight the corner for human beings here. And the final P is part. And what he describes it as here is who needs to do what to make this happen. Now, I'd go further than that, and I'd say actually Simon Sinek's wrong. We don't start with why, we start with how. And actually, I'll go on to explore this a little bit more. Thinking about the behaviours that underpin this. What are the really tangible behaviours that we need to get happening for this change to take hold? For me, that's the what or the how that is critically important. And then who do we need to be living and breathing those behaviours? I'll build on that a little bit more now, but still really helpful stuff. I touched on Dr. Leandro Herrero and his theory of viral change. Great book of the same name. And again, provocative visuals, but I think really nails it where he describes traditional change as tsunami change. So the way that we do it in organizations typically is it's sort of hatched and then, you know, we switch the tap on and it sort of washes through the organization, down through the ranks, and carries everything in its wake along the way. Tsunami change is wrong. It's big, it's bold, it's in your face, it's programmed, it's branded, it's campaigned. This is big change in big organizations, and hopefully that sounds familiar to you. And what he delves into, which is Stanley Milgram touched on back in the 60s, this is social networking, and we now have the science to be able to do this. We have actually relatively accessible science in terms of, it's called organizational network analysis or social network analysis, where we can literally map individuals' connections in the workplace. So at its most extreme, you can use organizational network analysis to identify the real influences inside your organization, and that's the folk here who are bigger on this graphic. But what he says is that, you know, an organization doesn't work in that traditional linear organizational chart way. That's actually rubbish. This is how an organization works, through the interconnections of individuals, which I think is absolutely inherently true. So he builds this idea as if we can identify the movers and shakers, the real influencers inside the organization, And if we can get those individuals behaving in a way that drives real change, and he talks about macromolecular behaviors, but it's getting down to a really specific, tangible, often quite small set of behaviors that if everyone did them would deliver that change. So he's approaching it as a behavioralist, and very much with an eye to change being a behavioural thing. And it's really powerful, and I'm not doing it huge justice here, but to me that really resonates, this sense of sort of micro behaviours, real clarity on behaviours, rather than top-down change, is we identify the movers and shakers. And it's not saying it's bottom up, it's actually more side to side. But it's actually using those individuals to spread the virus of change through their behaviours. And there's lots of great examples in the book of how he does this, how this happens. And he calls that butterfly change. So in contrast to tsunami, which washes over everyone. And it's from that old saying that the flapping wings of a butterfly create a hurricane miles away. And there's something I think that's really powerful in that. Small, it's almost small change, it's almost flipping big traditional change management on its head and embedding it in the organization and spreading it through virally through the influencers and movers and shakers inside the organization. And now in today's age of technology, in social networks that we have inside organizations, this can really be powered. This can be a reality now through the tech that we often have access to. So massively influential, I think, Dr. Leandro Herrero, and it joins many of the dots that we've talked about previously there, and some of the other theorists. So finally, this is sort of all building up to a sense of co-creation, of change. And as from the EX space perspective, we're all about creating great employee experiences, and within change we're about creating great change experiences. And the best way to do that, the best way to help employees cope with change, is for them to help create it. To me, that's a kind of no-brainer. So actually the tools of EX, of everyday EX, are hugely beneficial here. This doesn't need another toolkit. For me, this is about using the tools of design thinking, the tools of positive psychology, the tools of agile and elsewhere to shape this and build and co-create and involve people in shaping change. Katie, I'm going to come to you. You've done a lot of work with clients on taking if you like, an EX-based approach to change, using things like personas and empathy maps and journey mapping. Do you just want to bring to life a few of those for us?
Yeah, and you can see here on the screen, we've got the classic triple diamond, which really represents the approach to EX by design. But it might be in your particular capacity, you can only influence part of this. Now, the ideal is always co-create the change that you want to achieve, in which case, this is the approach that you would take. You would involve people in understanding what is true of today. Where do you want to get to? Really take them on that journey with you. Work with them to really understand their needs, their challenges. Coming back to someone's point that was made earlier in the chat about understanding feelings, above and beyond the processes. How does it actually make people feel? What is it they really want, to help us define that human need rather than just this, it's a change, it's happening to you. So how is that going to impact them? What will they need to really benefit from the change, perhaps, or at least make it a better journey for them? And it might be that you also have the ability to involve them in what the solution is. You might be able to involve them in creating the ideas, working out what comes next, going out, prototyping and testing it with them to make sure that whatever the problem, whatever the challenge, ends up fixing what it is that they need. Now, that's the ideal, but the reality is you might not be able to do that. I mean, someone put earlier on in the chat, not all change is about redundancies, and absolutely far from it. In fact, there's so much change that is aside from redundancies, but it might be that that is the change that you're going through, at which point you don't really have the ability to kind of scope it out and take them through this process. But what you might want to do is use the tools that you gain from employee experience design in this kind of middle diamond here to really help what comes next. So using, for example, personas, as Lee mentioned, understand the different people that you've got in the organization and how those different personas may be impacted by change, both in the way it makes them feel, but also, maybe operationally as well, depending on whether you're looking more specifically at those behavioural personas or maybe role-based ones. So how does that really impact those people, and what is it they would need to work through that change? How is the best way to communicate with them? How is the best way to involve them? Thinking about empathy mapping and mapping out how each of those people feel. What is it they really, really need? So even if you don't have the ability to co-create the change with them, it might be that you can use some of the tools within EX design and design thinking to make sure that you manage the change in the best possible way.
Thank you, Katie. Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. So the kit bag exists here to go and do this, and to do this in a much more human-centric way. We don't need to sort of reinvent things here. It's just about tapping into that toolkit that exists. And I found that hidden slide I mentioned earlier. So I'll share that stat, which is only 27% of leaders feel strongly prepared to help their people navigate change. So less than a third, and this is managers and leaders, or people leaders, if you like, within the organisation, feel well prepared to help their teams navigate change. Managers are the forgotten audience. So conscious of time, we're coming up to the end. I want to allow enough time for questions. So just to sort of bring this all together, this is the journey that we're talking about. And I think on the left there is what I see as traditional change management. It's linear, it's process and procedures, it's top down, it's directive, it's big and branded, it's fear, loathing, shock and anger, Mr. Pennywise, it's done to rather than with. And human-centered change is really the complete opposite of that. It's very organic. And I think the Leandro Herrera's stuff and the way that we can spread change like a virus really plays to that organic theme. It's very much focused around people, around culture. It's collaborative, it's socially driven. There's some great theories and research around change and the role of conversation. Change really happens within conversations. It spreads through individuals. It's inherently human. So why do we do the stuff on the left? It's about building psychological safety, high trust. It's about empathy, co-creation. It's about experimenting. It doesn't need to be meticulously designed in a darkened, hidden project room in the business and then unleashed. It should be iterative. It should embrace uncertainty. It should be decentralized. It should genuinely value diversity and multidisciplinary teams. Middle managers, as we said, absolutely critical role to play as role models for role modeling behaviors, as connectors, as culture shapers. And rather than focusing on the loss, it's about focusing on the opportunity for human beings, for employees to grow and thrive. So that's really what we're aiming for and what we're trying to push here. And finally, just really quickly, in terms of getting practical, hopefully there's a bunch of things you can take away from that session. But, get stuck in. My first point is to, make sure someone is fighting the corner for employees. I know from my internal comms days, often communications are dragged in at the very last minute. It's an afterthought. They come in when everything's been decided. We better get the comms work stream in place before we go live. It's that kind of mentality. We need to get in early. We need to see change coming down the line and be involved in it. But most importantly, someone needs to be banging the drum for people and employees. We need to make an effort to really understand those impacted and getting away from this audience mentality to really getting under the skin of people, using tools like personas to really understand not just what they're thinking, but their emotions and the drivers for those emotions, the potential losses, the potential opportunities for them to grow and thrive. Start small, experiment and learn, and just get stuck in, apply some of these elements on a change program that you're working in. If you want to know more, EX Designer Masterclass will teach you all about that EX toolkit and how to design great experiences, be they change experiences or broader than that. Make friends with internal comms and work together to build a meaningful comms plan. If you're not an internal communicator, do that. But a comms plan for me is not an announcement plan, okay? This is where we go wrong. It's not about sharing information or cascading information. It's about listening and dialogue and connections and conversation. Very, very different thing. Pinpoint the behaviours. We need to think more like behaviouralists. What is it that if everyone started doing it would transform this organisation or this particular thing that we're looking to do? What are the behaviours that we need to embed? Identify the influencers. There's a world of opportunity now. You can do it the smart and expensive way. You can do a full-on social network analysis exercise, or you can just go out there and identify the movers and shakers. Often they're not the people we expect, and they're certainly not, they don't follow the hierarchy of the organization. But if you talk to people and have conversations, those influencers are often pretty visible to you. So get out there and talk. Involve, equip and empower middle managers. We have to get this middle manager piece working. Identify the losses, but also the flip side, the growth opportunities for your people. Most change programs come with a big upside. You know, there's an opportunity as we begin to embrace AI for employees to learn a whole wealth of new skills and do things way more effectively and enjoyably than they ever have. And we see from a load of other data the real need for skills development amongst employees right now. So those are ways to kickstart it. And I've always wanted to finish with a Mother Teresa quote. So here we go. I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. And that's what I kind of lay down to you folk is, you know, we can all start doing bits of this. We don't have to do it in a sort of radical way that really challenges everything, but we can start introducing components of this right now and shifting the way that the organization thinks about change and how we do it. And with that will come success. And hopefully we can create a bit of a movement around human-centered change. So I will zip up there, Katie. And let's open the mic up for folk that have questions. Let's get rid of the slides.
Fab. Thanks, Lee. We have got a question that's already come into the chat, so we'll start there, but do feel free to add any others. We won't have a lot of time for questions, but we'll try and squeeze a couple out. So question from Judy: how do you co-create in a large organisation? When we changed our values, there's a real proud statement that 800 people helped shape the new values, but that means 1,700 didn't. Now, there's already been an answer from Mark, which is absolutely correct, that actually a 20% sample is a pretty good job of representing the whole, which is a great starting point and absolutely correct. The other thing that I would say is if you have something like personas to use, it will give you a really good feel and a really good flavour of the different types of people that you have within your organization, particularly if you've got behavioural based personas. We've mentioned them a couple of times already on the call. You don't always have the opportunity to go out and speak to, I mean, to be honest, I think 800 people is a fantastic number, and it's very rare that you have the opportunity to speak to anywhere near that volume. If that isn't something that can be done, then having something like personas in your back pocket, they're used more like a thinking tool. So rather than the personas of old, where they were used to really segment the different types of people in your organization, the ones that are kind of more role-based, personas today are really about making sure that when you're considering a change or a program or a campaign or a design of something, you're factoring in the different needs, the wants, the challenges, the opportunities of those people, those different groups of people. So if you're unable to go out and speak to a big number of people, work on some personas. The great thing with personas is you can use them time and time again. You may iterate them over time, but generally speaking, you go through millions of projects over the course of however long. So having something like personas in your back pocket is a really good way of sort of just sense checking. Have I thought about this person? Have I thought about the impact on those? So that's another thing I would say. The only other point I'll make on that, I don't want to be going on too long, is it's another great opportunity when you have a really huge organization like that, is using something like champions, which we've talked about, because again, you're only one person, or you might be a team, but there's only so much you can do. So working with other people to really go through your change, having these conversations, listening to people, making sure people feel heard is another really good way of making sure people are catered for in a really large organization.
Katie, I'm just going to add, I agree completely with that. And I think my flippant answer would be sort of break it down. And actually, the easiest way to break it down is to get down to team level. So for me, it's about those middle managers. It's about implicating them. You could develop a toolkit. You could equip your managers to be able to run sessions with their team to capture this input. And that would be a whole lot broader, a lot less top down. You get input from a much bigger cross section. Champions, change champions, or networks are another way to get to that end. So break it down. Don't think of the organization as as an entire group that you've got to wash everything over. Get down to team level, find out what they're thinking and how it resonates with them. Yeah, great point.
Thanks, Lee. Any other questions that we have? We are coming to the end of, I was going to say the end of time then, but that sounds a bit dramatic. coming to the end of our time together today. Any other questions? If not, I think it's probably a great time to wrap up. Just coming back to Lee's first point, if you're not a member of the EX space already, do make sure you sign up. Lee, if you can flash up that QR code again, if anyone's got their phone with them. There are 2 different tiers of membership level now, one of which is completely free. Like I said before, the webinar from today will be uploaded on there, but you also get to be part of the community as part of that free tier as well. So if you do have other questions, you can join our community. You can ask those questions in our community feed and we'll be able to answer them to you. So if you haven't become an EX Space member yet, scan the QR code. You can join either the free tier or become one of our pro members, in which case you have access to absolutely everything, all of our courses, our learning, our tools, loads of templates, everything you need to be able to do this stuff. So, right, that's it from me. Anything else from you, Lee?
No, just to thank everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and for your insights and observations and questions along the way. It's been a blast. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. And what date's our next one, Katie, to put you on the spot, the next of the summer series?
You
the
have
last of
me on the spot, haven't you? Let me just double check and see. No, I'll have it here somewhere. The next of our summer series is on the 3rd of September. It's a Tuesday, same time as today, so 4 p.m. British summertime. And in that one, we're going to be talking about the age of disruption and the changing employee-employer relationship. So looking at the kind of broken world of work, the different challenges, different things to be aware of, things like mental health and well-being, different expectations of your employees, and really EX, why creating a great employee experience is a strategic imperative and what you can do.
Sounds good. I'll be there for sure. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Really appreciate your energy and input today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.